Okay. Last thing, Wheel. Mr. Wheel, thank you so very, very much for the 40 gift subs. That is an insane amount of support. Allow me to repay it back. So, Nagash. In the kingdoms of Nehakara, so ancient civilization, Nehakara, Nehakara is united under a guy literally named Nehek. Or, was it Nehek or was it? I think, yeah, I'm pretty sure it was Nehek. So Nehek, who founded Khemri, ends up becoming the first of the Priest Kings. And he goes through all this shit, and he basically unites Nehakara under one banner, and names it after himself because, you know, Tomb Kings. The first, or sorry, he was not the first Priest King. That's not correct. He united Nehakara, but he was not the first Priest King. But he unites Nehakara under one banner, all the kingdoms like kind of established with one another, and he forms the crown of the king. So the crown that Cetra wears was created by Nehek. And basically what he did is he ran around and told all the other kings, hey, you belong to me now, you're my vassal, obey me. And they were like, get fucked. And so he kicked the shit out of them, and they were like, okay, sorry, my bad. Let me give you my crown. And Nehek went great and took their crown and combined it with his own crown. And once he had combined the crowns of all of the different cities, he then declared himself King of Kings and was like, Khemri is now the capital of Nehakara. Everybody has to do what I tell them to. This is my crown now. And everyone was like, cool. So many generations later, Nehakara is having a really, really bad time. And there's a horrible plague. Lots of people are dying. The crops are wilting. Shit sucks. And up comes Cetra the Imperishable. You may be wondering what this has to do with Nagash. I'll get there. So Nagash steps up, or Cetra steps up, and Cetra goes, wow, this plague and everything really, really fucking sucks. This is all awful. So tell you what, I'm gonna make an offering so amazing that the gods cannot ignore me anymore. I'm gonna offer the gods an offering the likes of which they've never received. So he tells his city, we're gonna give everything to the gods, and we're gonna hold a huge ritual. And during this big ritual, Cetra murders his entire family. He sacrifices all of his children, all of his wives. He murders all of them in a ritual to give to the gods, to basically say, hey, I'm gonna offer you all this, but in exchange, you guys get your asses together and unify behind me. You acknowledge me as king. And the gods were like, hey, that's awesome. That's awesome. So the gods send this giant storm, and it's this massive storm that rains a whole bunch, and it floods the River Vitae, also known as the River of Life, which washes away all of the like nasty shit from the plague. It clears out, the plague ends, the crops regrow, and Khemri is healed. And Cetra says, hey, I have the approval of the gods. I am now the King of Kings. I declare myself the first Priest King, because I don't need your acknowledgement, petty mortals. I have the acknowledgement of the gods. They say I'm the Giga Chad, so everyone's gonna do what I tell them to. And all the other kings told Cetra to get fucked, so Cetra went around and just kicked the shit out of everybody and dominated all of Nehakara. And then he decided that wasn't enough, and he proceeded to dominate the entirety of the Southlands and most of the Badlands and a significant amount of what we now know as the Border Princes. So he took over this gigantic empire. So Cetra starts growing old, because it turns out the only opponent Cetra can't beat is death, because he's growing old. So he tells all of the Lich Priests, which the Lich Priests are the priests of all the different gods. They were not called Lich Priests at this point. They were just called priests. He tells all the priesthoods, hey, I don't want to die. Figure out a way to stop me from dying. And they say, okay, we're gonna try and figure that out. So so the priests start working on trying to achieve immortality, and they do an okay job. They extend Cetra's lifespan considerably further than he should have lived. He lives for a few hundred years instead of only like a few decades, but eventually he does die. So Cetra dies, and with his dying breath, he basically curses the Mortuary Cult for failing him, and they're like, hey, like, don't be mad at us, we'll figure it out. We will resurrect you. We'll find a way to bring you back with a golden, immortal, godlike body. You will be beautiful and perfect. And Cetra's like, fuck you, and dies. So they bury Cetra, and because of Cetra's last order, this whole culture develops around death. Like the Mortuary Cult is basically all of the priesthoods fused into one power, kind of like the Great Orthodoxy is for Kislev now. And the Mortuary Cult becomes obsessed with trying to figure out all of this death shit and immortality. So many generations later comes Nagash. So Nagash was the firstborn son of the King of Khemri, who was also the King of Kings. Whew, okay, so Nagash is born. Nagash is the firstborn son to the king. However, according to Nehakaran culture, the Mortuary Cult is so important that because Nagash was the firstborn son, according to basically the culture of Nehakara, the Mortuary Cult was so fucking important that the firstborn child, or actually, no, it had to be a son. There were no girls allowed. There were no girls allowed in the priesthoods. Girls weren't allowed to use magic in Nehakara. So the firstborn son of royalty had to be given over to the Mortuary Cult. This allowed the Mortuary Cult to have a significant amount of political power, which they really liked, and B, it was just kind of a sign to like help keep them going and stuff. So Nagash was given over to the Mortuary Cult to be raised and taught all of their stuff. Meanwhile, the second-born son, Nagash's brother, got to be king. So Nagash already wasn't super thrilled about that, but as Nagash is a child, Nagash starts being inducted up. So Nagash, as a boy, is learning about the Mortuary Cult. He's learning about death. He's learning about the gods. He's learning about priests. And as part of his kind of initiation, his education, Nagash is taken around to all these different places to see people dying. So he sees people as they're dying. He sees people after they die, because he's learning about like the embalming process and the nature of the soul, which I just made a video on, by the way. You should go watch it. It's really cool. And so Nagash just learns all this stuff. But Nagash, looking at all these people dying, he watches what it's like to die. You know, he's engrossed in it. And Nagash has an interesting revelation, which a lot of Nehakarans are obsessed with death. But for Nehakarans, most of them are not necessarily so worried about dying as they are making sure that when they die, they get like a good place within the realm of souls. So they are important enough or wealthy enough that they are able to be rewarded in the afterlife, and they get to live in paradise instead of going to the shitty part of the Nehakaran afterlife, the realm of souls, where you get devoured by terrifying hounds and digested and then devoured again over and over and over for eternity. So most people don't try to like avoid death, outside the Lich Priests who discovered immortality, but they discovered a really shitty form of immortality because they got eternal life but not eternal youth, which is why all the Lich Priests look so like desiccated. They're actually still alive. They're not undead. Fun fact, Katep still alive. Katep's never died. He's not undead. He is alive. That's just what alive looks like for him. Same thing with all the Lich Priests. So anyway, Nagash sees all these people dying, and Nagash looks at it and goes, "This sucks. This looks like absolute shit. I hate this. Death looks like it fucking sucks. I'm not going to die. I refuse to die." Because Nagash basically, he's terrified of death, but he also thinks it just looks awful. So Nagash just, in his deepest, darkest core, decides, I will not die. And so Nagash becomes obsessed with trying to figure out a way to cheat death, which, lucky for him, being in the Mortuary Cult is a good way to do that because they've already discovered immortality. So once again, their form of eternal life is really bleh. So Nagash becomes one of the greatest ever seen in the Mortuary Cult. He is very prolific. He is exceptionally skilled at using magic. But he's very limited by the knowledge of his forebearers. The Lore of Nehakara is a very, let's say, simple lore of magic, because the priests did not learn the truth of magic. They don't know the true nature of magic. Instead, the way the priests of Nehakara learned how to control magic was through the gods. The gods basically, the priests would basically offer up prayers and offerings to the gods, and in exchange the gods would the Lich Priest would basically use the gods as a fulcrum for their magic casting. So with Nagash, Nagash is very unsatisfied by this, because while the Priest Kings did actually manage to take their magic beyond just like basic prayers into a genuine actual magic, and from their obsession with death and from trying to learn the truth of the nature of reality and suss out all its secrets, they managed to learn the lores of death and light, thanks to like imprisoning djinns and imprisoning, which are basically elemental spirits of the lords of magic, and imprisoning demons and kind of like drawing information out from them. They basically, you know, they learned the lore of light, they learned the lore of death, but that's it. You know, they weren't able to really learn anything outside of that, other than their basic, other than discovering their own lore, which they use their gods as a conduit to cast. Nagash realizes that this is very limiting. It's not enough. He understands death better than anyone alive. He understands souls better than anyone alive, but he doesn't understand magic well enough. But then Nagash gets lucky, because what happens is that a group of dark elves wreck on the coast of the northern coast of the Southland, so the northern coast of Nehakara. So Xandri manages to capture a group of dark elves alive, and not only do they capture these dark elves, I believe there are 3 of them, but one of them is a sorceress. So they capture a wizard and 2 other dark elves, and the Nehakarans are aware of elves. They've been attacked by the dark elves before, but so to them the dark elves are these super fucking terrifying entities that they don't understand very well because they never really dealt with them very much. So Xandri, to be better safe than sorry, they drug the shit out of the elves to make them just like caught in a stupor so they can barely think, and they're basically kind of zombified, and they throw them in chains, and they're like, you know what, let's send these to Nagash as a gift. Let's send these back to Khemri as a gift. And Nagash gets his hands on the elves, and Nagash realizes that one of them's a sorceress. And Nagash goes, oh, I'm going to learn such things from you. So Nagash starts working with this sorceress who he basically tortures in exchange for knowledge. And he keeps her well enough drugged that she can't reach well enough into the winds of magic to do anything about him. And he's very, very careful to make sure she's never able to pull one over on him. So he basically tortures her and her companions, and is basically like, hey, if you don't want to starve to death, you teach me about magic. Hey, you want to get water? You're going to teach me about magic. But he keeps it pretty tame. So she teaches him a massive amount of magic. And Nagash starts recording all of his information that he's learning into these books. And through this dark elf sorceress, Nagash learns the truth of magic. And she teaches him about, more importantly, she teaches him about Dar. And Dar is dark magic. It's basically when you take all the winds of magic and you slap them together to make a really, really powerful form of magic, but it comes at a really high cost. It's also typically known as blood magic, because when you use dark magic, it can have a profoundly negative effect on your body. But if you sacrifice someone, like you cut somebody open, you can use their life essence to suffer the ill effects of the spell rather than yourself, which is great. So Nagash learns dark magic, and he starts taking the lore of Nehakara and dark magic and putting them together. And Nagash starts to learn that he doesn't need the gods, that the gods of Nehakara, if anything, are in his way, because they want sacrifice and service in exchange for their power. And Nagash realizes that the gods need him more than he needs them. So Nagash cuts the gods out of the equation, and he creates the Lore of Undeath. He learns how to make a corpse come back to life by using his knowledge of the soul, using his knowledge of the realm of souls, using his knowledge of death, combining it with all of this knowledge of dark magic, and he learns how to rip pieces of people's souls out of the afterlife and force it back into their bodies. And it doesn't even have to be that specific person, but he learns how to rip pieces of the spirit out of the ether and force it into bodies, which resurrects them, and he starts experimenting with it. And once Nagash realizes that he's learned all that he really can from the sorceress, he says, thank you, thank you for teaching me everything. I appreciate you. I'm gonna let you go. Haha, just kidding. Nagash is a dick. What he actually does is he murders the sorceress's bodyguards and friends. He just fucking murders them brutally and horribly and has them mummified alive, so they have all of their organs ripped out through their orifices, and they are killed. And then to the sorceress, he physically takes his own hands and puts out her eyeballs, rips her eyes out, has her tied up, and then he takes a lead helmet, because lead cuts off the winds of magic, and the sorceress is very in tune to the winds of magic, and he imprisons her head within a lead casket so that she's completely cut off of the winds of magic, and uses his own magic to make it where she is completely separated from all forms of senses. So she's basically caught in an endless black hell with no senses whatsoever and can't even touch the winds of magic anymore. And then he seals her alive inside of a sarcophagus and buries her inside of the Black Pyramid. Now, with all of this knowledge, and of course there's shenanigans going on with, like, he takes on Archon the Black as an apprentice, and he starts co-opting the Mortuary Cult. Nagash assassinates his own brother. So he murders his brother, who's the king of Kimri, and he takes over, and he says, I am now king. I am the priest king of Nehakara, and anybody who disagrees with that is gonna die. Some people disagree with it, they all died. So Nagash takes over Kimri, he takes over Nehakara, but a lot of the other cities kind of like stay out of it, because they're like, okay, whatever, as long as he does his thing and he leaves us alone, like, we're not gonna be bothered, like, we're not gonna mess with him. And Nagash builds the Black Pyramid, relatively around this time. The exact timeline is a little finicky. I'd have to go double check some things, but you get the gist. So he builds the Black Pyramid of Nagash, and Nagash is so arrogant that he says, hey, that giant pyramid that belongs to Setra the Imperishable, the King of Kings, the first great king, the first great priest king of all of Nehakara, who has such a long list of titles that it takes like a fucking day to go through them all. My pyramid is gonna dwarf his pyramid, because fuck Setra. So he has this giant ass pyramid built, and Nagash makes it out of very specific materials, so it acts as an arcane fulcrum. The Black Pyramid of Nagash is not only a monument to his arrogance and his pride, but it's also designed very specifically from its placement to the materials used to build it, to the point that Nagash specifically wanted slaves to build it because he knew lots of these slaves would die, and Nagash had people strategically murdered in vast quantities at certain points along the construction, so that their souls, their blood, their agony would be basically built into the foundation of the Black Pyramid. If you've ever seen Full Metal Alchemist Brotherhood, the whole like creating the Philosopher's Stone thing where like killing people at specific points around the country, it's basically that gist. So he kills a whole bunch of people, and through all their torture and sacrifice and all this shit, he builds the Black Pyramid of Nagash. So the Black Pyramid is finished, and it starts absorbing massive quantities of magic, because it draws magic into itself and stores the magic like a giant battery. So Nagash is building all this up, and he goes, yes, I'm so close. And he finishes his magnum opus, which is the 9 books of Nagash. And within completing the 9 books of Nagash, Nagash creates his greatest creation of all time, which is the Elixir of Immortality, also known as the Elixir of Eternal Life. So Nagash creates this elixir, and he drinks it, and it gives him true immortality. Nagash cannot die, no matter what. Even if you destroy his body, he will not die. His body will slowly but surely begin to reform itself. There is, as far as we know, granted, there are actually ways to kill him, but they're very, very few and far between, which there are some stories about it. So Nagash creates this elixir that makes him truly immortal. He cannot die. His soul will never go to the afterlife, where it will be devoured by gods and demons and other soul hunters. He is immune to that. And he also gives it to some of his acolytes, most notably Archon the Black. So Archon the Black becomes a true immortal. In a sense. So, but after this, Nagash miscalculated, because Nagash thought that everyone would be too scared of him to ever do anything about it. And all of the other priest kings unite under one king, and this king was the king of Lamia. And the king of Lamia, which was King Lamashizah, decides, you know what? This guy sucks massive dick. He's horrible. He's demanding tithes from us. He's forcing us to go out and fight wars to get slaves to build his pyramid. He's like spitting in the name of our gods. He's like co-opting and ruining our religion. This guy sucks. We need to get rid of him. So Lamashizah gathers all of the priest kings and they declare war on Nagash. And this huge war breaks out between Nagash and the priest kings of Nehakara. And it's a gigantic war, but the priest kings have the gods on their side and Nagash has undeath on his side. So Nagash starts resurrecting corpses, which is something no one has ever seen before, at least in mass quantities. And this massive war breaks out, and Lamashizah, the war lasts for decades. But Lamashizah ultimately dies during the war, and his son, Lamashizar, takes over. And fun fact, Lamashizar is Neferata's brother. I believe it's Neferata's brother. And Nagash is ultimately defeated. How exactly this war goes down depends on from telling to telling. In some stories, the Lizardmen join Nehakara in fighting against Nagash. In some stories, it's just the Nehakarans. In some stories, Nagash like breaks the gods at this point. In some stories, he doesn't. It just, whatever. There's some finagling there. But in any event, Nagash is ultimately defeated and he flees into the Black Pyramid, and the Priest Kings try to chase him into the Black Pyramid, but they're stopped by Archon the Black. And Archon the Black stands before them with his weapons and everything, and he says, any man who dares touch my body will suffer a fate worse than will suffer a fate worse than death, by which he means oblivion. So Archon the Black says, if you try and touch me, not only are you going to die, but everything about you will be washed away from time. Your true name, the very concept of your existence, will cease. So you don't get an afterlife. You just get oblivion, which to the Nehakarans is like the scariest fucking thing in the universe. And Archon the Black, he fights this epic fight. Somebody throws a spear. It hits Archon and kills him. But Archon the Black, with his last spiteful breath, says that whole spiel and he dies. And Archon the Black casts a spell which causes his body to be consumed by black fire. And Archon's body basically kind of collapses on that spot, but he's blocking the way. And the way he's blocking, his skeleton has literally been burned black by this horrible fire, which in the older lore is why Archon the Black's skeleton is literally charred black, was because of this magical flame. And all the Priest Kings are like, you know what? Nagash will probably starve to death in there. Nobody wants to touch him, so they all are just like, let's just leave him. So they just leave Archon the Black's body. They don't mess with him, and they leave. So Nagash at this point escapes using a secret exit from his own sarcophagus, or his planned sarcophagus, and Nagash escapes into the desert. Nagash escapes into the desert, and he heads northeast into the Badlands towards the Sour Sea, which was not known as the Sour Sea at this point. And as Nagash is making his way across the desert, Nagash dies. But Nagash dies, but the way Nagash essentially dies is that his body just sort of collapses onto its knees due to starvation, exhaustion, hunger, and everything. But Nagash's soul does not realize that his body died. And Nagash's soul just kind of keeps walking across the desert. And he basically starts to go completely insane at this point. But eventually Nagash gathers enough of his wits, and through sheer willpower and the elixir of immortality, he eventually makes his way back to his own body, and he possesses his own body. So he basically becomes undead at this point. So Nagash possesses his own body. He gets back he returns to his physical form. He gets back up and he keeps walking. And eventually he arrives at oh god, what the hell is the name of that mountain? Cripple Peak. And Nagash finds this mountain that looks like something from the heavens just shattered this mountain into pieces, and there's like this giant opening. But Nagash arrives at the sour sea, and the sea kind of glows weird colors and stuff. And Nagash drinks from the sour sea, which, is salt water, and it probably should have killed him. But a whole bunch of warpstone had leaked into the ocean. And so Nagash unknowingly starts consuming warpstone, and it energizes his body. And all of a sudden he's like, whoa, okay, I feel pretty good. And so Nagash turns to Cripple Peak, and he makes his way inside, and he discovers a giant meteor of warpstone. I mean, a fucking huge meteor of warpstone that ages ago fell from the heavens, slammed into this mountain, and literally shattered it, and went inside and created Cripple Peak. And Nagash looks at the stuff and goes, oh, this looks interesting. And so Nagash starts consuming warpstone, and he gets really fucking big, really fucking strong. And his body basically transforms into the giant, horrifying, nasty looking skeleton monster that we all know and love, because the warpstone kind of mutates him into that form. And Nagash creates a genuinely perfect body. So Nagash at this point starts resurrecting massive amounts of undead from all the tribes and ancient people that lived around Cripple Peak, and has them start mining warpstone, and he builds Nagashazar around this peak. And Nagashazar is known as the greatest fortress in the world because it's massively deep, and it was built by endless legions of undead, and it's full of all sorts of horrible traps and shit. Of course, this is where the Skaven eventually show up. The Skaven show up, and the Skaven are like, hey, we're gonna steal that warpstone. Nagash says, no the fuck you aren't, and they get into a big war with each other. It turns into a stalemate because while the Skaven have endless hordes, and to them there's no such thing as meaningless losses, they also are somehow fighting an opponent who also has no concept of meaningless losses because they die and he simply raises them back up. And Nagash himself is barely participating in the war. And so the Skaven are like, okay, this is kind of a problem. But Nagash eventually comes to them and says, hey, tell you what, how about we stop fighting? I'll just give you decent quantities of warpstone, and in exchange, we'll have a truce. I'll give you warpstone every once in a while. You leave me the fuck alone. And the Skaven go, okay, fine. So they kind of work in an alliance, and Nagash at this point has fully built back up his power. He resurrects Archon the Black, and at this point, Nagash unleashes a new war against Nehakara. Around this time, he discovers the existence of the vampires, so he discovers that Queen Neferata exists and her court of vampires in the city of Lamia. He binds them. Some finagling starts happening because Nagash starts getting involved. The priest kings, or the various kings of Nehakara, discover the existence of the vampires, and they all unite under a new king, King Alcatazar, who's basically the most badass king since Cetra. He leads a big war against Lamia, lays siege to Lamia, and despite the fact that they have all these powerful vampires, they fucking raise the city. Like, they just blow the shit out of it. So Lamia is sacked, and the vampires are scattered to the winds, and they all run to Nagash because Nagash basically calls them to him because they essentially are his creations, though, through a kind of a third party. And Nagash is like, hey, y'all would make really good generals. Tell you what, this guy, Vashanesh, you look pretty cool. You seem pretty awesome. Plus, Vashanesh, who's Vlad von Karstein, is one of Nagash's descendants. So Nagash is like, not only do you have my bloodline, but I think you're the most capable of these vampires. Here, take this ring that's super insanely powerful and will make it so you can never die, but it also forces you to do whatever I tell you to. And Vashanesh goes, oh, okay, cool, I guess, and is made like one of the high generals of Nagash's army alongside Archon the Black. They lead this big invasion of Nehakara. Huge war breaks out between Alcatazar and Nagash's legions. And Nagash says, okay, I want you to defeat like Alcatazar and bring Nehakara under my control. Vashanesh, however, figures out kind of a loophole in that if he gets killed, the moment he actually dies, the connection between him and Nagash is severed, and during that moment, the vampires, including Vashanesh himself, will be able to run away. So Vashanesh gets in a duel with Alcatazar, and he purposefully gets himself killed. So Vashanesh gets his head chopped off by Alcatazar, and all the vampires piss off. They all are like, let's, the leash is off, let's get the hell out of here. They abandon ship. So all of them, except for Wazoran, who is the head of the Necrarch line, abandon Nagash, and Nagash gets super pissed and he curses the vampires that they will never be able to feel the kiss of the sun again, and the sun will burn their flesh and cause them to die because he's so pissed at them. So Nagash decides enough is enough. He consumes a mass amount of warpstone, and he causes this gigantic super spell where he unleashes a plague on Nehakara that kills everything. It kills all the animals, it kills all the plants, it kills all the bugs, it kills all the people, it kills everything. And then he sends Archon the Black at the head of his legions to finish off anyone that may have still been alive. He also poisons the River Vitae with these really, really cursed warpstone artifacts that turn it into the River Mortis, which is why the River Mortis is the color and consistency of coagulated blood, and it kills anything that so much as touches it. So instead of being the Great River of Life, it's now the Great River of Death. And Nehakara becomes the land of the dead. Alcatazar is the only person spared from this plague, and he's captured by Archon the Black because once his family and everyone he loves dies, he just kind of gives up. And Archon takes him in chains back to Nagashazar, where Nagash laughs in his face and tells him he's going to torture him and do all sorts of horrible things to him after he completes this great ritual. And Nagash summons all of his great power to him and says, I'm going to resurrect all of the dead in Nehakara. Like everyone who has ever died in Nehakara will be resurrected under my control, and it will create an army the likes of which this world has never seen. And they will start to march across the world where they will destroy anything and everything, and then I will resurrect all of the world's dead. I will resurrect every single thing that has ever died into a single army under my control, and I will wipe out all of existence. So that the only thing that exists is me. Nothing will move, nothing will speak, nothing will twitch without my permission, because, you know, he's a god. Anyway, well, he's basically a god at this point. So Nagash unleashes this ritual, it works, it starts resurrecting all of the dead, they start making their way back to Nehakara. The Skaven decide, you know what, we realize that if he wipes out all of life, that includes us. So the Skaven, being moderately intelligent in this moment, create the Fellblade, which is a terrifying, super deadly blade made out of pure warpstone and enchanted with every single rune and incantation of death, doom, and destruction the Skaven can possibly conceive of. And it's so deadly that to look at it will literally give you stage 4 cancer. So they take the Fellblade, they put it in a lead sheath, and they take it through a bunch of a runner system to Nagashazar as fast as they can from Skaven Blight. And when the Skaven arrive, they give the blade to Alcatazar and tell him, hey, take this sword and just take it. And they run away. Alcatazar takes the sword, and the sword compels him to go find Nagash, which he doesn't need much compulsion because he fucking hates Nagash, which they were counting on. So he decides to... Oh, is there an ad? Hold on. So Alcatazar makes his way to the throne room. He takes out the Fellblade and he swings at Nagash's head. Nagash, through some magical means, like, becomes aware of the fact he's about to die. He holds up his hand to block it. His hand gets cut off, and his hand, like a giant, grotesque, undead, like skeletal spider, crawls away into the shadows and gets away. And the rest of Nagash is Alcatazar. Nagash blasts Alcatazar with a shitload of magic, but at this point, the Council of 13 or sorry, not the Council of 13, but the Greyseers, the Greyseer Council was putting, like, all 169 of them were watching Alcatazar through the Fellblade, and they were guarding him with magic. So when Nagash blasts Alcatazar, all 169 of the Greyseers are deflecting Nagash's spells, but Nagash is so fucking strong at this point that a lot of the Greyseers just instantly drop dead. Like, their brains literally explode, like you know, they're leaking blood out of their eyes, and their heads just pop. And a significant number of the Greyseers just instantly die, because stopping a single spell from Nagash takes that much effort. And Nagash picks up Alcatazar and starts choking him to death with his other hand, but Alcatazar rallies his strength, chops off Nagash's other hand. Nagash once again screams at him and unleashes another spell. Greyseers block it again, and Alcatazar just goes into a frenzy and chops up Nagash into a bunch of itty bitty tiny pieces. So Nagash's body collapses because despite all of his power, even he can't hold out against the Fellblade, and he quote-unquote dies. Alcatazar stumbles out of the room carrying Nagash's crown and is never seen again. Meanwhile, the Skaven, a bunch of Clan Eshin assassins immediately run into the room, and they start gathering up of all of these pieces of Nagash's body and start throwing them into his own warp forges, where Nagash created a lot of really powerful items. They start throwing all of his remains in there, hoping that the warp fire will incinerate him and kill him, which, to be fair, should have worked, but it didn't. So Nagash dies. And his spirit is sent screaming into kind of a between realm between the physical world and the afterlife, but he doesn't actually go to the afterlife because of his whole elixir of immortality, and Nagash's control over the Great Ritual is broken, so a bunch of magic unleashes a backlash of magical wave that causes an event known as the Black Year. If you go check out a video of mine called the top 5 most powerful spells ever cast, you'll learn more about that. This creates the Tomb Kings, but Nagash is essentially dead for all intents and purposes. But Nagash's hand, known as the Claw of Nagash, got away. And because Nagash's claw got away, he's still around. So many years pass. And in the year, oh gosh, during Sigmar's lifetime, Nagash, actually no, it's I think it's a little bit before that. I don't remember the exact year, but the Skaven take over Nagashazar at this point. What happened to the Fellblade? Nagashazar, or the Skaven end up getting it back later. They reclaim it. But Nagash later reforms. Basically, he very slowly but surely starts putting himself back together again. He basically regenerates within his sarcophagus, because as the Skaven were throwing all of his body into that warp forge to burn it, yeah, sure, it incinerated him, but basically all it did is it turned Nagash's body into air particulates. It turned him into dust and ash and smoke and shot him up into the atmosphere. So all of that bits and pieces of Nagash that went into the atmosphere became this big dark cloud. And slowly but surely over the years, it made its way over to Khemri, over to the Black Pyramid of Nagash. It was drawn to the Black Pyramid of Nagash like a magnet, and it started to rain. And this nasty black substance started to rain down on the Black Pyramid of Nagash like a foul goo. And this black, messy rain substance starts leaching its way inside of the Black Pyramid of Nagash through the seams and cracks, and slowly makes its way back to his sarcophagus. And there, all of this black goo starts climbing up and collecting in his sarcophagus, and hundreds of years later, Nagash is back. And his hand reaches up and wrenches open his sarcophagus, and he's back, baby. So Nagash has returned, but he doesn't have his arm. His arm is still gone. He's missing his hand. So Nagash storms out of his Black Pyramid in a rage, and he declares war on the Tomb Kings. And he basically says, "You are undead. I'm the great necromancer. You all belong to me. You must do as I say." And Settra says, "Go fuck yourself," because that's what Settra does best. So Settra, Nagash comes out, he raises his armies, and Archon the Black immediately rallies to him, and Nagash declares war on the Tomb Kings. But Nagash is very, very surprised to find that Settra is a lot fucking scarier than the story said, because Nagash had never actually met Settra. He had heard legends of Settra, but he had never seen him before. So Nagash meets Settra on the field of battle, and this is a really, really big war between essentially, you can kind of think of them as Vampire Count undead and then Tomb King undead, and it's known as the War of the Dead. And fun fact, for the Arabians, fucking terrifying period of time, because basically there were undead everywhere, and they were fighting each other. So you just saw nothing but skeletons, zombies, statues, horrors beyond description, just all this nightmarish shit attacking each other, and you just have these poor nomadic horsemen caught in the middle of it. Fucking awful time for them. But anyway, they do manage to get away from it. But Settra ends up going up against Nagash, and Nagash learns something horrifying about Settra, which is that Settra has a magic item. And this item is called the Scarab Brooch of Usirian, which weirdly he doesn't have in Total War Warhammer. We're still waiting for Creative Assembly to give him that item. Come on, CA, get your ass together. So the Scarab Brooch of Usirian is basically, it's exactly what it sounds like, a scarab brooch that Cetra wears around his neck. And this thing makes Cetra fucking immune to magic. It makes Cetra completely immune to magic. So Nagash, towering over the battlefield, sees Cetra hurtling towards him on the Chariot of the Gods. Cetra's cutting down, you know, all sorts of nightmarish abominations, making a beeline for Nagash. And Nagash is like, ha, okay, whatever, and shoots Cetra with like a really powerful spell, bounces off. And he goes, oh shit, shoots another one, bounces off. Shoots another one, bounces off. And Cetra's like, bitch, I got your number, here I come. So Cetra manages to get up on Nagash and kicks the shit out of him, and Nagash is forced to retreat. So Nagash runs away, Archon the Black runs away, everybody runs away, and Nagash realizes he cannot defeat the Tomb Kings. Not gonna happen. So he runs away to the north, and Nagash moves back a bit and he goes, I know what the problem was. The reason I wasn't able to beat Cetra is because I don't have my crown. I need my crown. So Cetra, actually I think before this he retook Nagashazar. I believe he wakes up and goes back to Nagashazar, murders all the Skaven in a single night by himself. There was an entire clan there, and this clan was so powerful that they were actually on the Council of 13. Nagash one-shots them in a single evening. Anyway, so Nagash took back Nagashazar, and he builds for himself a metal arm. He basically uses his warp forges to make this really terrifying metallic arm for himself that works as good as the real thing. And he decides, I need my crown back. Why is the crown so special? Because the crown is literally just the one ring from Lord of the Rings. Nagash poured so much of his essence into the crown that without it, he's very, very limited in power. And granted, Nagash wants all of his artifacts back, but the crown is the most important artifact. Like Alakanesh, his staff, Zevit Nafar, his or Morakain, the black armor, Zevit Nafar, his blade. They're important, but they're not nearly as important. So he needs his crown back. His crown, he can sense it, is in the north. So Nagash starts making his way north, and he starts sending out undead vassals, essentially, or like messengers, who go to where this crown is, and they find these human tribes, and they tell these humans, hey, you've got this really important artifact, give it back to us, and you will not be horribly murdered. Give us back the crown, and you will not suffer a pain worse than death. And leading these humans, these humans, you see, were united under a new nation of men known as the Empire. And the Empire is led by none other than Sigmar Heldenhammer. Sigmar Heldenhammer had actually worn the crown of Nagash already prior to this, and he knew that the crown of Nagash, which they knew as the crown of sorcery, was not a good thing. It was a really, really bad thing, and they had buried it deep in this stone well, essentially. And Sigmar tells Nagash, I don't know who you are, but I will tell you that I know this crown is bad time, and fuck you, I'm not giving it back. So Nagash says, fine, I'll come take it. And as Nagash is making his way north, he senses something. Nagash senses something extremely powerful. He senses a spirit that he wants. He goes, ooh, that tastes good. What is that? What's that barbecue I smell on the wind? And he follows it, and he discovers a tomb. And Nagash discovers this tomb that was erected by worshippers of chaos around a great champion of their own. And Nagash walks up to this tomb, and he looks at it, and he goes, Krell. All right, I want this Krell. So Nagash starts unleashing his sorcery to resurrect Krell, who had died quite some time ago, to the dwarfs. But his body had been recovered by his followers, and they had erected a monument, or a monolith, there we go, in his, because chaos people like to do that. So he starts actually fighting with Khorne. Nagash starts basically waging a war with Khorne, with the dark gods, to claim Krell's soul for himself. Because Nagash, even this reduced state, is still really fucking strong. So Nagash is like vying for control of Krell's soul, and Krell gains enough awareness that Nagash is able to offer him a bargain. And Nagash says, listen, your god promised you an eternity of battle, and he lied to you. Khorne, the dark gods, they lied to you because you're dead. Look at you. You're not fighting. You're just a fucking skeleton in red armor, and you're doing nothing because Krell, probably due to dying the way he did at the hands of the dwarves, Khorne did not take him into his afterlife of eternal battle. Krell just died. So Krell decides, you know what? This Nagash guy's got a point. And Nagash says, I will give you a true eternity of battle. None of this bullshit of going to a fake ass afterlife where this god is going to play around with your soul. He's going to use you as a toy, like a little soldier action figure, like a fucking nerd, and you're not going to get to actually shed good blood anymore. No, I will bring you back to this world and you will have a true eternity of battle because nothing is more eternal than death. And Krell says, all right, I'm on I got it. Sign me up. Sign me up. And so Krell is resurrected by Nagash, the great necromancer. So anyway, so Krell is resurrected, and with Krell as his left hand and Archon the Black as his right hand, as well as like just a small number of vampires. Supposedly, it depends on which version of the story you're looking at. In some versions, he has 2 vampires with him. In some version, he summons the vampires and they don't answer his call. That seems like the more likely version, is that he summons the vampires and they just are like, nope, we're not coming. So Nagash goes to war with Sigmar Heldenhammer. Huge war breaks out. It's known as the Battle of the River Reich because it takes place, next to the river. And basically, they have this huge showdown where it's Nagash versus Sigmar in the center of the line. Krell fights the dwarf rune lord Alric the Mad and King Kurgan Blackbeard? King Kurgan, I think it's Blackbeard. Or is it Ironbeard? King Kurgan, whatever. The High King Kurgan, actually, he was the High King at the time. He was the king of Karasakarak. King Kurgan, Alric the Mad face off against Krell, and they're like, fucking Krell, you're supposed to be dead, because they remember Krell. Book of Grudges, all that shit. And Nagash faces off against Sigmar, and then Archon the Black faces off against a couple of other characters. So this big fight happens, and Sigmar is wearing the Crown of Sorcery, and Sigmar puts on the Crown of Sorcery because he knows that the Crown of Sorcery will allow him to use magic, and Sigmar figures that he's going to need to be able to use magic in order to basically throw off Nagash's own spells, and he also believes that it will attract Nagash to him like a moth to a flame, and he wants Nagash's attention. So Nagash beelines for him. They have this really epic big fight, and Nagash actually ends up stabbing Sigmar. I believe he stabs him in the arm, but Nagash actually gets the upper hand. He stabs Sigmar with his very, very legendary sword, Nebitifar or something like that. And it fucks up Sigmar, but Sigmar gets him one over. So Sigmar, as he goes down, granted there are different versions of the story, but Sigmar takes off the crown of Nagash and basically hurls it to the ground, and he makes like he's going to try and destroy the Crown of Sorcery Galmarez, which just probably isn't going to work. But when the Crown of Sorcery gets basically thrown down or Sigmar loses it, Nagash goes for it, because Nagash is like, I need this. This is my everything. Like, I need this. So he goes for his crown, and at that moment, Sigmar takes up his hammer and swings it as hard as he fucking can, and he hits Nagash right in the fucking face. So Nagash just takes just 100% effort straight to the face, and Galmarez translates to Skull Splitter for good reason, and Nagash just gets decapitated, essentially. So Nagash's head basically shatters, and Nagash just instantly dies. So Nagash dies, and with his dying essence, Nagash is so pissed at the vampires because he blames the vampires for not coming to his aid, because Nagash rightly feels that if the vampires had done what he asked them to, he would have done. Nagash curses the vampires and says, "Never again will you be able to turn aside when others invoke their gods around you. Anytime you see anytime you see or hear anything that is Sigmar, you will suffer and be burned for your cowardice for not showing up to aid me in this time." That's why vampires are extremely vulnerable to faith-based weaponries and attacks and stuff. And Nagash is once again killed. So Nagash, quote unquote, dies. Archon the Black realizes, oh fuck, we lost, runs away. Krell tries to run away, but Krell runs away by slaughtering his way through the dwarf line, which, you know, pisses them off. And the dwarfs are like, Sigmar, dude, this guy's gotta die. Like, Krell has to die. This is a really big problem, especially because Krell is not a single individual. Krell is a package deal. Also something we're missing from Total War Warhammer, because Krell actually has a personal legion, and Krell's personal legion, I want to say it's like there's 1,000 of them. They are super fucking scary. They're just a really, really terrifying chaos horde of undead wights who follow him. So Krell fights his way free and runs away, and Sigmar's like, okay, fuck, we gotta chase this guy down. But Sigmar heals. I want to say Sigmar heals for like a few hours, and then him and the dwarves chase after Krell. And Krell does a fighting retreat, and they goes all the way from Reichland into the Grey Mountains, where Krell is finally run down by Sigmar at Glacier Lake. And Krell and Sigmar have this super big epic duel, and Sigmar finally kills Krell again. So Krell dies again, and the dwarfs entomb him. And they try to hide it, and that's where Kimmler ends up finding him much later. So, anyway, Nagash dies, and you think, hooray, he's gone forever. Nope, he'll come back. So Nagash does come back. He returns, God, I want to say he returns in the year 1111. 1111. But that might have been, he might have come back in negative 1111. I'm pretty sure he comes back in 1111. But Nagash once again returns. He comes back to life, and he goes to Nagashazar, and basically he sits down on his throne and goes, fuck, I'm tired, and he hasn't moved since. And that's where he remains to this day, the actual body of Nagash. So Nagash's husk lies within Nagashazar on his throne, and he has not moved since that day. But of course, legends and rumors abound that there are some, such as Archon the Black and Manfred von Karstein, who are attempting to return him to the world at his full power. And should they ever do so, surely we're all doomed. Also, one last fun fact for you. Did you know that the Claw of Nagash, which is the Vampire Count Regiment of Renown Mortis engine, is actually powered by Nagash's hand? That's why it's called the Claw of Nagash, because it literally has Nagash's claw, so his arm that got chopped off. It's been a relic all of these years, ever since he originally died, and that's what's powering that Mortis engine. The end. You may applaud now. Wheelhouse, hey, you're welcome, dude. Thanks so much for the 40 gift subs.